Facebook, on Zoom, and in person. And we also interact with the wider EA movement. I've asked Mike to join me here today. So Mike's an active member of our community, and he's on our board of directors. Board of advisors, sorry. And Mike lives in New Jersey. He's an elder in his local Presbyterian church, and he works in finance. So I suggested that Mike kick off our talk today by sharing some relevant scriptures.
Hello, good evening, everyone. I'm Mike Morell. Thanks for joining us. Figured I'd start out with a reading from the book of Proverbs. Here's two proverbs you may have heard. First one is charity begins at home. And when you listen to people use that phrase, they usually mean take care of all the needs in your own country before helping out foreigners. And then there's the phrase, it's the thought that counts, which is usually around gift giving, where it doesn't really matter if someone needs your gift or appreciates it. It's your own good intentions that count.
You sure about that one, Mike?
You know, let me Google this real quick. No, actually, yeah, JD, I think there's a problem. I don't think either of these is from the book of Proverbs. Here we go. I fixed up the next slide. Let's take a look. Yeah, these aren't Proverbs at all. And beyond that, they're not even, they don't even really have to mean what some people think they mean. So the phrase charity begins at home was first used in 1642, and it was originally about being kind to yourself, kind of in your own heart, before you could be charitable to others. So it was more of a psychological concept that had nothing to do with local versus global or anything like that. Then it's the thought that counts, and you know that there's some truth to that, but I think that it's better rephrased by saying that if the gift giver thought hard about what he or she thought the recipient would want and went to the trouble of getting it, then that shows a level of respect. So it's putting thought into it is what counts, not just, oh, here's anything that I gave, and as long as I gave something, it's about my own intentions. Anyway, let's move on. I have an actual scripture to share. This one's from Luke 10, where the expert in the law stands up to test Jesus. What must I do to inherit eternal life? Eternal life. Jesus says, what is written in the law? How do you read it? And he answers, love the Lord your God with all your heart, your soul, your strength, and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus replies, you have answered correctly. Do this and you will live. And it's worth noting that in Matthew's gospel, Jesus highlights this as the greatest commandment, right? So this is pretty important. The lawyer, the expert, wanted to justify himself, so he asked Jesus, who is my neighbor? Now I've highlighted some key points here. I really think all of the Christianity and effective altruism is contained right here on the screen. This is kind of the heart of it to me, is when you love someone, when you really love someone, whether it's God or your neighbor, you bring all of your mind into it. It's not, yes, you bring your soul and your heart and your strength, but also your mind, just as you would for yourself. When I'm doing things for myself, if I'm trying to, I don't know, if I'm picking out a laptop that I need, I'm going to read a lot of reviews. I'm going to do my homework. I'm not going to want to waste my money. So it's definitely not the thought that counts. I want to get it right. And I think if I love my neighbor as myself, I should be doing the same. And that's a lot of what we're going to talk about tonight. And the second thing I highlighted here is, who is my neighbor? Big question. And I think probably many of you remember how Jesus answered that question. He told the parable of the Good Samaritan, which, just in paraphrase, man's on the Jericho road. He's beaten and wounded by robbers. A priest and a Levite pass by and don't help. And then a Samaritan stops, attends to the man's wounds, takes him to an inn, gives the innkeeper money to take care of him, and goes on his journey and says, I'll check on him when I get back. Yeah, that's telling us a lot, I think, about Jesus's heart. So Yeah, what do we take away as the morals of the story? Well, first one that jumps out to me is your neighbor includes foreigners, even people you might see as enemies. You know, we know that the Jews and the Samaritans didn't get along. They didn't socialize or live in the same villages, and there was religious and political tension between them. The second thing that strikes me is that sometimes helping is hands-on. And sometimes what's needed is money. So the Samaritan was really trying to be practical. He took care of this immediate need with his own hands of a wounded man needing bandages. Um, but then in terms of taking care of him in the longer run, he didn't quit his job or cut short his entire journey or whatever he was going to. He thought the innkeeper was in the best position to help, so he reached into his pocket and provided funds. Now, the third lesson you might take from this is that unless God puts a troubled person directly in your path, it's not your problem. I see JD kind of shaking his head a little bit at that one, so let's think about that a little more. Yeah, and on the next slide, yeah, I think those first 2 points are pretty valid. And again, and just full disclosure, neither of us is a theologian, so there are 100 good interpretations to these parables. I don't mean to oversell it. This is just personally how it speaks to me. But that third point, I don't think I agree with. You know, I think we're called to care about all kinds of problems, even if they're not right in front of our face. And even though there isn't such an example in this parable, it's clear how the apostles thought about it. In 1 Corinthians and several other parts of the New Testament, we read about Paul going around to all the churches in the Mediterranean collecting funds for the poorest Christians in Jerusalem. And, you know, there probably were plenty of poor people in Corinth and Galatia and Ephesus and all those other places. But I think Paul was sending a very symbolic message that we are all one human family, even if we're separated by great distances. So just to wrap that up, this who is my neighbor? I think Jesus is suggesting the whole world is our neighbor, frankly. And what he's doing in this parable is something a philosopher might call expanding the moral circle, where his listeners are assuming they should care about a narrow group, and he makes that group broader. And this is a theme you'll run across in EA on several fronts. We won't go into all of them tonight, but there are people in EA that are focusing on animals or the unborn or the far future generations, and kind of building on that concept that Jesus has of kind of taking a wide view of who you might help. So yeah, with that, I'm happy to hand it back to JD, who'll kind of get into the meat of how effective altruism deals with this.
That's so good. Thanks, Mike. And it really raises the question for me and maybe for some of you, given that there are so many promising opportunities to do good in the world, which ones are really the best, right? Like, how can we be good Samaritans to our global neighbors? I think a lot about my local community, but I don't think a lot about globally and people who maybe I'll never meet. And that also raises the question, what are the organizations that reliably work, save lives? The ones that don't just pay lip service to development, but have actually been proven to work. Do they even exist, right? Are there any groups that are actually getting the money there? And then a third question that comes to mind is, how can we be good stewards of all of our resources? So surely that consists of our money, but also our time and also our careers. And how can we use those to do the most good possible? And these are really key questions, and we need to continually consider them, I think, especially in our own lives and in today's world, which is constantly changing. And I think God wants us to consider these questions too. Fortunately, there's a group, we mentioned earlier, a group of people, thousands around the world who are tackling these in universities and cities and in churches throughout the world. And this movement is called Effective Altruism. So the key focus of the movement is a thoughtful and intentional approach to doing good. It's about using careful reasoning and evidence to do that, and then to take action on that basis. So for the next 15, 20 minutes or so, we want to share some of the amazing findings from effective altruism, which might just change your life and your faith. The first big finding or big takeaway from EA is that the difference in impact between charities is shocking. You may have heard of charity evaluators that measure things like a charity's overhead budget, what percent of the money donated actually goes to the cause. And these kind of things, they matter, but they're not really what matter most. One of the main focuses of EA is effectiveness. So for every additional dollar donated, what's the impact? And when you dig into the data, the difference between charities on effectiveness is really shocking. So consider, for example, the cause area of blindness. This is a cause that is a focus of one of the United Kingdom's favorite charities. It's called Guide Dogs. And their mission is to help people with sight loss by providing seeing eye dogs. And these are dogs that are trained to assist with everyday tasks that are difficult for people who are blind or partially sighted. And this is really a wonderful service for thousands of people in the UK. A less well-known charity is called Sight Savers. They work with some of the poorest people in the world, including people who suffer from trachoma, a bacterial infection that, if left untreated, often does cause partial or full blindness. So in many countries, trachoma pushes people into this vicious cycle of poverty, limiting access to health services, education, and employment. To put things into perspective, the way an effective altruist might see it, the cost of a guide dog, according to Guide Dog's website, come out to about $78,000. Surgeries to treat trachoma cost less than $20 per patient cured. So, of course, I know the effect of a guide dog is more than just practical help with eyesight. But if we consider sight improvements alone, for the cost of providing one dog in the UK, you could provide comparable improvement to over 3,500 people. If your goal is to help the blind to see, to me, it's clear which charity is more impactful. And it's shocking just how extreme this difference in impact is. So here's another example. Let's consider education for girls in East Africa. And about now, I'm going to ask Evan to bring up our poll. Here's the question. Which intervention would you think best improves school attendance for girls in East Africa per dollar spent? Free uniforms, cash to families who send their daughters to school, merit-based scholarships, or telling parents how much more their children will earn by staying? I'll give you about 10, 15 seconds. All right, 5 more seconds. All right, what in the polling? And if you could share that, that'd be great. So most people voted giving cash to families who send their daughters to school. Let's take a look at the results. So if we look at free uniform, cash incentives, and scholarships, it's clear that free uniform wins out, which is actually got the lowest votes of all 4. But if we compare that to info about future earnings, that just skyrockets. It's just such a much larger impact, not just a few fold, but 10. I mean, what is that? That's about, it's $140 to increase 1 year of schooling. Whereas you don't even get 100 of that with cash incentives, which is really counterintuitive, right? I mean, I would say these results are really good. Like we've got some people who are knowledgeable about this topic, and we've got some EAs in the call too, and this is a common example, but it just goes to show that our intuitions aren't always correct when it comes to measuring effectiveness, and especially in the area of health. So it's really important to do our homework when we give, to really look into the issues, to look at the charities that are working in this space, and to see which ones are really for getting you the most for your dollar. And like Mike said, after all, most of us spend hours researching the next laptop or car that we buy. even the laptop I'm using right now. I think I was on Consumer Reports, and I researched for maybe 10 hours or so as a college student. I wanted to get the most, right? Yet it's so strange. We rarely do this when we're giving our money away to people who need it much more than we do. And in the eyes of God, giving might be one of the most important things we do, really. So if you haven't thought seriously about where you're giving, and critically as well, then you're probably doing less good than you could be. But the good news is that researching has become easier than ever before, right? So recent advances in data collection and impact comparison, pioneered by groups like GiveWell, can show you where your bucks go the furthest. So GiveWell reviewed 400 charities using a high level of rigor, randomized controlled trials, and I encourage you to check out their methodology if you're still a skeptic. So the second big idea from EA, and here are just a few charities that GiveWell has reviewed and rated as a top charity. But yeah, going on to the second big idea, it's that we all have a wonderful opportunity to make a massive difference through our giving. And I'd like to give another poll. And this poll is, if you're an average American, a single American who earns $50,000 a year, how wealthy are you compared to the global average citizen? I'll give you about five more seconds. Okay. So again, we've got 6 votes for top 1% of earners, followed by 10% and 5%. And the correct answer here is top 1%, or really top 1.5% or so. And this is if you're considering single Americans who earn $50,000 or more after tax per year. They belong to the global 1%. That was really shocking to me. When I first started researching these things, I answered 1 in 10 wealthiest, not 1 in 100 wealthiest. And what I realized is that I'm in a much better position as an average American, a single average American, to give and to make a massive difference with that, right? And I think most of us here could easily commit to giving 1% or 10% of our income away. And with 10%, we would save over the course of our lifetime over 50 lives from malaria or 1,000 lives from blindness. And these are just shocking numbers if we imagine in front of our eyes what that would look like, seeing that kind of impact. And I also want to say, we're not special because we can do this. We haven't hacked a kind of system. We just won a kind of lottery, right? We've been born in a country with the right institutions and infrastructure at the right time. And the Bible's clear that this money that we have, it doesn't belong to us. It belongs to God. And so we have a responsibility to steward this wealth with others. And I want to share two verses that inspired me from the same chapter in Luke. From everyone who has been given much, much will be demanded. And from one who has been entrusted with much, much more will be asked. And again, Jesus says, for where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And these are really rich words. I don't have time to dig into them. We have on our website. I encourage you to check that out. But simply put, there's a joy that comes when we trust God enough, when we treasure God enough to give our money to him. And when we read in Matthew, Jesus identifies with the poor. And when we give our money to the poor, it's really a way of giving to God, done with the right heart. So it's really no surprise that when we give our money away, it makes us happier. So research from Nobel Prize winning economist Daniel Kahneman supports this. His research suggests that in an average family of 4, after they earn about $80,000 a year, earning more it adds almost nothing to self-reported emotional well-being. And the exact figure is different for everybody. But to illustrate this point, I want to quote a few people who are wiser and richer than myself. So the first is the beloved Jim Carrey, and he said, I think everybody should get rich and famous and do everything they ever dreamed of so that they can see that it's not the answer. And Jim's a millionaire, I'm pretty sure, but you don't need to be a millionaire to give. So my friend Jay is one of the most normal and friendly Christians that I know. Here's a photo of Jay and his wife and his two kids. So they're in Michigan. Jay grew up convinced that all he has belongs to God. And in medical school, he learned about effective altruism and really saw it resonating with Christianity. So he and his family of four, they cap their income at 48%, and they've given away everything above that, 75% of their take-home pay. And they've done that for almost a decade now. And he's raising his kids with this mentality of spend less on yourself, save, and give to somebody else. And this has really helped them to be themselves in a way that Jay says, quote, buying new curtains would never allow us to be, right? Just home improvements, the bigger car, the bigger, faster, more this American consumeristic lifestyle. It's not for Jay, and he's a lot happier because of it. So I want to encourage you to just dwell on that story and think about what it would be for you to follow Jay's footsteps. The third and final thing I want to share, the third big idea from EA, if you will, is that your day-to-day job might be the most significant thing. Even more important than giving money away might be making the right career decisions. So one last poll. Approximately how many hours do you think you'll spend in your career? I suspect a lot of people are going to get this one right, but I'll give you about 10 seconds. All right, we'll end the polling here. All right, knock on wood. So the correct answer is 80,000 hours. And that's a lot of time, right? So one way to think about that is 40 hours a week, 50 weeks a year for 40 years, 80,000 hours. So if you could spend just 1%, or if you could make your career just 1% better, in theory, it would be worth spending up to 800 hours on that. And that's what this group, 80,000 hours, actually tries to do. So they team up with recent college graduates, especially from promising universities, and they help these graduates find the most effective career path. And they've done tons of research, right? So they teamed up with academics at Oxford, spent about 5 years looking at things like pay and work environment and industry and what really makes a job meaningful. Where are really the socially impactful industries? And here's just a few things they found. I don't want to belabor this, but I think it's worth sharing just a couple of these. So the first thing that they recommend is that your dream job, it isn't merely an easy one or one that you're passionate about, right? Because our interests change pretty often. I mean, I came into college thinking I would do something very different than I'm thinking now as a senior. And they recommend look for work that you're good at. Look for work that helps others and that has supportive conditions like good colleagues and gets you in a state of flow. The second thing they recommend is to use this framework when thinking about where to work, what industry to go into. Work towards an area that is important, that's neglected, and that's tractable. So this means working on things that are large in scale, that other people neglect, right? So things that in the world that need to get done that wouldn't get done if you didn't do it. And tractability is really important too. So it's important to have some way to make progress on that area. And this has been a sort of rallying framework for effective altruists who've taken this framework to consider a really wide range of cause areas. It's not just global health or poverty, but that's a pretty important one. It's also about research into biosecurity or research into things like risks from artificial intelligence and like really wild topics that you wouldn't hear from your typical do-gooder who wants to change the world. And the third thing they recommend is consider one of these paths, right? Earning to give, direct work, or building career capital. So building career capital is like building yourself up for the future to do a really influential job, either through direct work or earning to give. So earning or direct work, you might think of it as working directly for a charity or an organization that does good in the world. But then earning to give might mean intentionally pursuing a path because it's high income. And people like Jay have followed this path. I mean, it's not for everybody, but if you have your heart in the right place and you're considering that path, then there's a lot of people in our community who've pursued actually all of these paths, and I'd be happy to connect you with them. Yeah, and one person who pursued this earning to give path is John Wesley. So he's the founder of the Methodist Church. In his sermon, The Use of Money, he gave this really simple message: earn all you can, save all you can, give all you can. So to wrap up, I want to remind you of these three key lessons, the three big ideas from EA, which help us to better love and serve others. The first is that there's a tremendous difference between charitable cause areas. So some causes are 10 times more effective than others, and some charities are really effective within those causes. So try doing some research before you give next time, and it might be the most effective use of your time actually that you spend this year. And GiveWell can help you with that. I'd also be happy to chat as well about what charities I find maybe particularly compelling, but there's certainly hundreds, thousands you could consider. The second big point is that EA shows how important giving is for others and for ourselves. You can make a tremendous difference by just giving 1 or 10% of your money. And just look at the lives of Jay, of John Wesley. And I mean, the way John Wesley writes about it, he was so much more joyful because he did. I think you could experience that joy as well. The third big takeaway is that EA provides resources in a community for intentionally pursuing an effective career. So you can get more tips from 80,000 hours. You can go to our website as well. There are tons of people in the community who volunteer to be mentors. And we would like to invite you into this. And I want to remind you that these things, they matter because there's real sin and suffering in the world. I want to remind you again of the Good Samaritan. And this represents some person in the world who's calling out for your help. And most people are not going to listen, it's too abstract. It's too foreign. It's outside of my circle of concern, many people will say. But you don't have to be that person. God's given you this one life to make a really beautiful difference. And of course, in some ways you're going to fail. I mean, we all fail, but that's the beauty of grace. And God's going to love you even when you fail. But if you're like me, that really makes me want to try. And it's my relation, just speaking personally, like it's my relationship with God through Jesus that is really this wellspring from which I draw upon to get energy to be a force for renewal in this world. So Jesus says in John 15:5, I'm the vine and you are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, then you're going to bear much fruit. And I'm not the only one who thinks in this kind of language. There's a whole global community, like I was alluding to, and people thinking critically about effective altruism, Christians as well. So we invite you to join. If you're interested in discussing these general topics in greater depth, or if you're asking more specific questions like what cause areas are most important, or is my local church an effective place to give? Or was Jesus an effective altruist? We would love to talk with you in the Q&A or even after as well. So here's some next steps. You can check out our website. You can check out our Facebook group. We have regular discussions, but I want to ask, how many of you are willing to take a pledge right now to give 1% of your income, at least 1% of your income over your life to help the people who need it most, right? This isn't a legal binding pledge or anything, but I want to ask, how many of us right now are really considering taking this pledge for the first time? And we've partnered, EA for Christians, we've partnered with One for the World. They're co-hosting this talk. I see a hand. Thanks, Catherine. I'm almost finished. We'll just jump over to the Q&A real quick. EA for Christians has partnered with One for the World. They're helping host this talk. And this is what they're about, bringing people into an exciting global movement brought about by pledges of members to give away at least 1% of their earnings to the world's most effective charities. And 1% is a good starting place, right? So the OECD says that if just 1 in 10 people in OECD countries gave this much, we could eliminate global poverty by 2030. And after all, we all can live pretty comfortably on 99% of our income. So that's really encouraging. I'm seeing the poll results here, and that's really good. Just to close up this talk right now, I want to share one thing that EA for Christians has done with One for the World. We started this charity fund, right? Mike can talk a lot more about this. He's kind of the mastermind behind it. But this is a fund made by Christians for people who want to give God the glory for a lot of the things that are happening in the Effective Altruism movement, and give to the poorest and the sick around the world in the name of Jesus. So anytime you can go to our website, at the top right, you see this underlined giving campaign, and you can give with just a couple clicks. So with that, we'll hop into Q&A. I hope I didn't take too much of your time, but yeah, please feel free to stay and drop a question. You can drop it in the chat, or I'm not sure if voice is enabled, like if you can speak your question, I'd be fine with that too, but feel free to just shout out, like break the silence, drop a question. Okay, if you raise your hand, we can unmute you, is what Evan's saying. Evan, are you going to do the unmuting? I'm fine if we unmute everyone, but I'm not sure if I have the permissions for that.
Hello. I was wondering, thanks so much for the chat. I just had a quick question about, like, I think it's really great to be wise and use principles of what is most effective to make money go as far as possible. I was just wondering, like, what do you think about folks or moments where you might be hearing from God, like a call to give in a way that isn't most effective? Just an example, like you're in your car and you see someone who is asking for money, and you're like, wow, I just feel like God's compelling me to give cash. And again, that's not dealing with the systemic issues of why they're homeless or why they have difficulty, feeding themselves. But you know what I mean? Like, that's just kind of a small example, but I guess I want to leave room. Like, I think it's really great, like using effective altruism as like a general principle, but like, is there room for like God to be like, yeah, I want you to spend money in this way that's like totally not effective? Like, give you another example, like the perfume on Jesus's feet. Like, and you could argue the disciples were arguing for effective altruism when they're like, that perfume could have been sold and fed so many more people. And Jesus was like, actually, she did like a beautiful thing for me. So I'm just wondering what your thoughts about that. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Mike, do you want to answer that? You've talked about this before. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question, Vivian. And yeah, this is the verse that you brought up about the woman with the alabaster jar. I'm going to see if I can actually find a link to it on our website, because I wrote a blog post about it. Here we go. Well, here's a couple. I'll throw them into the chat. You can go through them at your leisure. That's from Alex, who's a member of our community. And see if I can find the one that I wrote. Because yeah, this is probably the one of the key proof texts you might use against this whole thing that we're talking about. But I'll give you the punchline. To me, I call that the exception that proves the rule. You know, imagine going to a party or someone's birthday or wedding or something, and a person brings an expensive gift, and the recipient opens it up. You know, a typical social reaction would everyone being, "Oh, wow, that's so nice. Oh, that's beautiful. Aren't you great for giving that gift?" And the recipient's happy, the giver's happy, and the audience is complimenting the giver on such a great choice. So this reaction that we see in this gospel story is very odd, right? How odd would it be if all of a sudden from several different apostles you're getting, "Wait a minute, shouldn't we have sold this and given the money to the poor?" So to me, I think they're all trying to impress their teacher, in the sense that Jesus had taught a lot about how luxuries were taking away things that could have helped the poor. But what the apostles did here was they attacked this woman who maybe hadn't been following them around for months and was out of the goodness of her heart trying to do something, and it just wasn't an appropriate personal attack against her. Number one. So he came to her defense. And second, you know, Jesus says, "Well, you'll always have the poor, but you won't always have me." So there was this great symbolism to the anointing and everything else. And this story has kind of stuck with us, and I think inspired people in their own way for centuries. So yeah, that's my take on the story. And I think not everyone, I don't go around sort of saying everyone in the world needs to be an effective altruist, right? And then if you're not doing all this homework, you're bad. Hopefully that none of that came out of the presentation today. But if you're like that in your own heart, and in me, I'm a finance guy, so it just optimizing kind of comes natural to me. So for me, I felt a personal call from God to bring that optimizing kind of framework into my charity as well. But I don't think it's incumbent on everyone to act that way all the time. As for people on the street, yeah, I try to carry around, if I know I'm going to be in a situation where I might run into someone who's going to ask for money, I try to keep a single dollar bill or some change in my pocket, because I think there's two benefits to that kind of giving. One is the money itself, and the other is this sort of validation of looking a person in the eye, wishing them a good day, and not, shuffling by without helping. And that fixed benefit is really the same whether you give 50 cents or $100. I think it's a great investment for 50 cents or $1. I don't think it's a great investment for $100. I actually tried that years before I was in Effective Altruism, and it didn't go well. It didn't change their life. It actually kind of led to some unforeseen situations that I think a competent social worker would have advised me not to get involved. So hopefully that helps. That's my own experience. That's an excellent question, though.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Should we just run through the Q&A in the written? Why don't we go maybe in order? So I'd like to answer this question. So yeah, like Jack, your question was, what are your plans for your own giving in the future? I'll answer that real quick, and Mike, if you want to add to that, you can. So I'm a senior in college. I'm not earning a lot right now, but I like Jay's model. So I've taken a giving pledge, but for a certain percent. But I really, I think praying to God about what is an acceptable cap on my income, like how much do I really need, I think that's a good way to go about it. So I won't say like what number I've settled on, but for me, like that makes a lot of sense. And I think I'll revisit that once, like if God willing, I get married and I have a family. That's something I hope to do at the beginning of each stage of life before I just get caught up in the culture. Yeah. Do you want to add anything to that, Mike?
Yeah, sure. I mean, like we said in the presentation, the stuff about do your homework. Obviously, a lot of us don't have time or skill to do all this homework from scratch. So I'm a big fan of GiveWell, this organization we mentioned, and that's the organization that picked all of the charities behind this campaign that we're running with One for the World. So they're my number one choice for giving to relieve poverty and sickness. I also am interested in kind of more what EAs call meta causes, which are ways to grow the EA movement to sort of have a multiplier effect. So part of it is, trying to create campaigns like this that help bring church communities into the flow of kind of what's going on in effective altruism generally. And yeah, part of it is saving just for, I kind of think there are great ideas out there in the future that I'll want to support. There's a lot of new charities being launched every year, and there are some discussions you could get into that say there are causes that are even more impactful than poverty reduction if they're super neglected, things like nuclear war prevention and things like that. So I'm still figuring a lot of that out myself, but the EA community and this EA for Christians community has really helped my thinking.
So we talked about giving alms to the poor. An anonymous question was, so who determines what effectiveness really means? So who makes up the board or group of people who set the standards? That's a good one. So I maybe the short answer is that there isn't like a list of, there isn't like a precise definition of what it means to be effective. So in this sense, EA is quite meta, it's quite broad. And there are thousands of EAs, and many people have different criteria for what's ultimately most valuable, right? Is it reducing suffering? Is it what is it exactly, right? Is it improving justice? And within a certain value, you might have like charities that rise to the top. But it's not like a group that says what's ultimately most valuable. It's more within the broad category of doing good. How do we understand that? And within what's most important, who's doing that the best? But that's a really good question. That's something we talked about just a couple weeks ago in our Sunday discussion. So each Sunday, the EA for Christians has a friendly chat for about an hour and a half. And we discussed about 2 weeks ago, like what should we value most as Christians, right? Does it all boil down to utilitarianism and maximizing pleasure and minimizing pain, or does God give us other things that we should value? And yeah, I hope that answers the question a bit.
Yeah, I thought that was a good answer, JD. And I, my impression of how GiveWell does it is, within a given framework, they can do a lot of really good research, right? So if the main goal is preventing death of children under 5 or maximizing the number of quality adjusted life years, they can do a pretty good job comparing which neglected diseases should be addressed with the most bang for the buck. But when it comes down to sort of bigger trade-offs, like what's more important, how many lives are saved, or general quality of life in terms of living in extreme poverty, those are much harder to trade off. So kind of an anti-malaria charity and a kind of cash transfers anti-poverty charity both make GiveWell's top charities lists. And there's sort of a recognition that they're not going to just pick the one best charity, because some of these judgments are very subjective. So what they look for is kind of outstanding charities in each field, and leave it up to the donor to kind of fill in some of those values blanks. And of course, it gets even harder if you're comparing causes, like if you're comparing poverty to the long-term future, to animal welfare, to evangelism, or any of these very different causes. People are still going to make up their own minds, and the EA community is not here's the list. This is how everybody has to give. It's a framework for just engaging your whole mind in the topic.
Great. So it's pretty similar to that. Catherine asked, what charities interest us? Thanks for the compliment, Catherine. I'm like tempted not to answer because I don't want my answers to be like anything official. But I can share. Yeah, I would say like Mike, the Give Well charities are really. I give to some of those, and I also care quite a bit about animal welfare. And there's another evaluator for animals, the animal charity evaluators, and they've done some really good evidence-based work there. And yeah, I'd recommend some of their findings as well if that's a cause area. But yeah, we recommend. I mean, I suppose as a gold standard, the Give Well methodology and a lot of the Give Well charities.
Yeah, if people ever ask me for one name particularly, I usually say Give Directly, which is one of the Give Well top charities. They provide cash directly to the poorest families in the world, and it's such a simple story, and it has this kind of component of autonomy, respecting the choices of the families involved instead of us from the outside picking which projects we want to work on. I also mentioned that just as a little plug, we have a conference coming up on April 24th, and one of the founders of Give Directly is actually going to be a speaker there. So there'll be info on our Facebook group if you check it out. I think it's going to be a good event.
Yeah, I'm excited for that. We've got 2 more questions, and one of them is about mutual aid programs being more equitable than charities. Are they equally as effective? Is it more effective to contribute to those or stick with charities? I'm going to plead the fifth on this one. I don't know that much about mutual aid programs. I did some I did some Googling to refresh, but Mike, do you have more to add to this one? I'm sure it's been written about somewhere.
Yeah, I don't, but I'm also going to plead the fifth. I'd rather honestly do that than try to venture an answer that's been thought out in 30 seconds. So yeah, if whoever asked the question, if you feel like posting a link in the chat, I'd be curious to check it out and see if I can have a more articulate answer to what makes them different. I think of a mutual aid society almost like an insurance company in some sense, but I'm probably mixing metaphors.
So Lisa asks, how do you give if you aren't making money or will be in debt from student loans for a long time? So I'm a senior. Mike, you went through university. I don't know if you were in this giving mindset back then, but do you have any practical tips on this?
I had a more conventional giving mindset probably when I was in college. I hadn't really, I hadn't been directly exposed to EA principles. I think the term effective altruism goes back to like 2009 or somewhere around there. So I was in college in the 90s. But yeah, more importantly, I hadn't really made the connection yet on just how integrated faith and giving were. There was, I'll actually throw another link in the chat. Apologies for bombarding you guys with this, but C.S. Lewis, I kind of read his books right around when I was 30, and yeah, just some of the things he said about charity really made this connection of how important really practical altruism was, and kind of changed my life really for the better. And the effectiveness part kind of came more naturally because I worked in finance. So if you're going to do something, you might as well do the math and optimize it and everything. But if you're in debt now, that's fine. I mean, the point of this, the whole point of this presentation, and knowing that our audience is mostly younger, is just to plant those seeds. It's not really about the total amount of money you can give at an age like this. It's about forming a habit of thought. So yeah, we'd encourage all of you to sign up for a campaign like the one on our website, even if it's you know, $1 or $5 a month or whatever it is you can afford, so that it forms those habits as you go through your life. And the other thing to keep in mind, like JD mentioned in the presentation, your choice of career is a pretty big deal. You know, it'll impact either your earning potential, or it can be a vehicle to really bring your talents to the world in a way that maybe doesn't generate money, but that addresses really important problems that are neglected. And yeah, the 80,000 Hours site's a good resource for that.
Yeah, that's one thing I really like about the One for the World campaign, is giving 1% something that I think college students can do, and while paying off debt, and just giving 1% helps you to combat that like value drift, getting a habit where you don't give at all, and you just start to take that as, well, I suppose for many people it is normal, but if you don't want that to be normal for you, then 1% is a great place. Yeah. So we got some more questions. If you have to run right now, it's I won't know. But we're here to stay and answer these questions and talk even past the hour. At least I am. So one of the questions is, how do we convince the church to make use of donations effectively? Mike, you've done some talking with your church about.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to jump in on that. Yeah, I'm an elder in a local church in my town, so it's yeah, this hits close to home. You know, as you might know, churches are kind of slow-moving institutions. You know, we're still singing some songs we were singing in the 1800s, and we do things by committee, so that moves slowly. So yeah, what I try to do is just work one-on-one with people and try to influence the culture, because I don't think most churches, most congregations are really using these principles well. You know, if you look at where churches spend most of their budgets, including mine, you know, the biggest components are usually staff and real estate, not external giving. So yeah, I think the church has some work to do, and I think I'd love to see some leaders rise up for the next generation to work on that problem. We did get something done, though. We did a campaign at my church for Give Directly. You know, we do something every Lent and Advent, and we got a successful campaign off the ground with them. And I keep mentioning them because they're my favorite, but I'm not affiliated with them in any way. I just bring them up because they actually were really happy to work with us, and they sent a video into the campaign, and it actually went really well. We raised some money from our congregation to help those far away. But it's a good problem. It's a good question you raise, and it doesn't have an easy answer, unfortunately.
Yeah. Hey, if you want to discuss that more, come to one of our Sunday discussions. And each week we get like 15 or 20 people who would love to discuss this with you, like one-on-one or in a bigger group. And that goes to anyone if you have like outstanding questions or criticisms about this. So the next question is, how do we know God values effectiveness? Picking the disciples was hardly effective. That's a good one. I don't think I have the perfect answer to this right now, but I think back on some of the parables Jesus tells. So one of them being the parable of the talents. Jesus gives, or he tells the story of a manager who gives talents to 3 different people, and they each do different things with the money. One invests it quite widely and yields a large harvest. Another invests it and yields a smaller harvest, and another buries it in the ground. and wants to keep it and for themselves. And Jesus comes back and he commends the man who invested in 10 cities, and he's given 10 more cities, I think Jesus says. And there seems to be this assumption within Jesus's parables that more of a good thing is better. I don't know if that's too contested. At least in Jesus' times, I don't think it was. But I think your question really alludes at maybe a deeper a deeper criticism or concern, which is like how we define effective, right? Like the disciples were pretty ordinary guys, and the king of the universe coming down and choosing really ordinary people seems like a very unlikely success plan to spread the kingdom of God. And yeah, I think that's true. Like, it's very hard to determine what really is effective. It's really hard to determine who God is going to use, but we do think that our mind has a role to play in this, that God has given us the gift of reason and in our brains to solve complicated problems. And effective altruists are very inclined to the kind of thinking that part of determining effectiveness is by thinking critically and using evidence. And that's not going to be always the most effective. And I think at the end of the day, God's going to judge based off of our hearts, right? It's not like about the consequence that God holds the standard to. I think he really looks at the quality and intentions of our hearts. So I guess I'm a bit of a virtue ethicist in that way. But yeah, Mike, would you add anything to that?
Yeah, no, these are great questions we're getting tonight. I'm having a lot of fun here. So yeah, I would kind of answer that, I guess, as a parent. So yeah, I don't think that Jesus, I don't think anything about Jesus's life, whether it's getting his message to the maximum number of people, or curing the maximum number of blind people, or visiting the most countries during his ministry. I mean, none of these metrics does it seem like Jesus is prioritizing effectiveness. I don't think effectiveness in and of itself is the real thing that it's about. I think it's about love. And like we saw in the Good Samaritan parable, if you're the type of person that wants to do things really effectively for yourself and for those you love, then expand that to more and more people, and you'll get closer to the heart of God. I'm a parent. I have my son's older than my daughter, and there were many times growing up when there was a task to be done, and I could have done it myself in 30 seconds, or I could let my son work on it, and he might do it in 2 or 3 minutes and learn something, or I could let my young daughter, the little one, take 10 or 15 minutes to do the task. And there was a different right answer for each situation. It wasn't about just getting the most done. It was about growing a person for the long run. So yeah, when you see these things like, why pick fishermen as your apostles, I don't pretend to know what's going on in his heart, because in this analogy, I'm one of the children, right? But yeah, I do think looking for effectiveness in these scenarios is kind of a fool's errand. But really, yeah, I feel like I have to be effective in my charity, because if I'm sloppy with it, I don't really love those people on the other end of the world, and by focusing on trying to be effective, it's training my heart, I think, to really care. Not just, I think we do one set of things on the lowest level because being a good person has benefits, right? You get liked and you get, respected. That's level one. Then you do things just because God's asking you to, and that's another level of things where God sees and the world doesn't. I speculate that I think God's trying to get us to a third level where we're really just becoming more like him, and we need practice in doing that. And that's why so much work, I think, was left for us to be doing. And EA is kind of it's a privilege to carry on that work that Jesus left unfinished for us.
And yeah, that's great. Thanks, Mike. I think there was someone who wanted to ask a question out loud. Was it Benny?
Yeah, thanks. Wait, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, so I know, like beyond the kind of global health and poverty stuff in EA, a lot of people see the suffering of non-human animals, such as in factory farms, as a big concern. And a lot of people are also very concerned about existential risks like nuclear warfare or pandemics. And so I'm curious whether at the EA for Christians organization, whether you've talked much about whether we can abstract Jesus's moral teachings to some of these kind of less obvious cause areas, or whether the Bible is possibly at odds with them. Like, for example, Jesus feeds fish to the 5,000, which you could argue that disagrees with the farm animal welfare stuff. Or, there are Christians who see the end times and the second coming as basically a good thing, as just that whole revelations. Yeah, I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, so that's really good. I think there's a few questions there. It's like, how do we view these other EA cause areas in light of our Christian faith? And if we view it differently because of that. So for instance, animal welfare and the plight of animals in factory farms, how do we understand that, especially with the counterexample of Jesus eating fish, and then there's the example of existential risks, the end of times coming, whether that's from artificial intelligence or asteroid, and how do we deal with eschatology, right? And yeah, so these are things we've discussed as a group, and we have a lot of articles on these. I don't want to go too deep in the weeds right now, but I think with some of these Christian EAs do have distinctive stances that are informed by their faith. I personally think that Jesus's purpose here was to advance the kingdom of God, and that Jesus came to not to give a list of rules of what causes and actions we must prioritize, but more so to embody perfect love and to set forward this example of perfect selfless love for others. And that's something that we have to continually rethink and reapply in light of modern problems and circumstances. So yeah, if Jesus was it's hard to say what Jesus would advocate today, but I think it's certainly a Christ-like thing to be concerned about existential risks. But maybe some Christian EAs would disagree, right? Yeah.
These are big topics, and so I'd repeat that invitation JD had. Join our Facebook group. There's an interesting topic that comes up every Sunday, and we don't all see eye to eye on these topics for sure. And yeah, there's a pretty big tent where everyone's welcome. We chose poverty as the subject of this presentation because almost everybody wants to do something about poverty. But these other questions are very interesting, and we can disagree and still love one another and look out for one another on them. Even back in apostolic times, if you look at Romans 14, there were people debating back then. Well, what really is correct about food? And the context was a little different, but it was this principle of don't be a stumbling block to your neighbor. And I feel like the warmth that I felt in these discussions when people just disagree on some of these issues is really encouraging. And it's just helped me grow to be around people that can challenge my thinking. I've seen some of my views evolve as I've looked at them from 4 or 5 different angles. Yeah, that's too much to get into the weeds on either of those topics, but we'd welcome you into the conversation.
Awesome. I don't see any more questions. Are there any last minute questions? Otherwise, if you want to talk further, I'm posting a link to our Gather Town This is a little, it's like Zoom, it's like a virtual chat room, but with a bit more flexibility. I'm going to hop on right now. So if you want to talk more, just like introduce yourself. Like I'd love to get to know who are the people who are thinking about these questions, and or not, like feel free to log off. But I think with that, we will close unless, Evan, do you have anything to add? I'm not sure if Evan can talk. I think he
No,
can.
I just want to give you guys a round of applause, and I know all of the 13 or so participants are also giving you a round of applause. So thank you everyone for attending. We will be following up with a feedback survey. We'd love to know how we can improve this event for future folks. So keep an eye out for that in the next 24 hours, and we hope you all have a great night.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Cool.
I see people wandering off. I guess I'll jump on GatherTown for a bit,
Sure.
see what goes on there. But yeah, I thought that went pretty well. A great job, JD. And thanks for setting this up, Evan.
Yeah, thanks, Evan. I think is Evan still here? Yeah, okay. Should we end the recording? I don't know how that goes.
Yes, we should.